Okay. Howdy, Joe is the name, and welcome to the Miller House. I'm proud to be a part of this organization. I'm sitting or standing in for the ailing Sue this morning. I'm here to introduce our speaker, which is kind of ludicrous, really, because everybody already knows who he is. So I asked him for a quote, and he said, "I'm here to talk, and if you're here to listen, well, I'll be just fine." So, leaving on a high note, Mr. Dave Knowles.
Tell you what, I've never talked to a crowd this big before. Especially when I'm from Keokuk, and you people are here because you know me, and you're critical, and you're going to be able to say, "Hey, are you sure that's right?" I just think that it's nice that there are so many people interested in Keokuk, as I'm interested in Keokuk. Now, every once in a while, I park right in front of where Billy Timmerman, Mr. Timmerman's house was, and I kind of look down 6th Street, and that was my neighborhood. Wonderful place. I don't know whether you people are interested or not, but Mike Brown lived down on the corner. Mr. Vanderheyden, Joe Vanderheyden lived across the way. Eddie Kahn lived in the next house. Peterson's lived in the next house. Harrington's lived in the next house. Knowles has lived in the next house. Nelson's lived in the next house. The Youngs lived in the next house. Harness has lived in the next house. That was important because I knew them all. And if you think that Dennis the Menace is funny, why, I tell you what, all the mothers on South 6th Street between Bank, Exchange Street, didn't think it was funny at all. All of my kids are boomers, baby boomers. Well, I think I was a depression boomer. That's what I was. I was born in 1925. I'll soon be 92. And can you hear me back there? If you can't, well, I'll move farther back. Okay? Anyway, to get this thing off Dub Center, I think that the neighborhood that we moved into, I moved from West Cape, and I lived right across the street from the Lincoln School. And it was wonderful because I was all by myself. I had 2 sisters and they were in school, so they went to school. And so I would go across there and I'd be on the playground with everybody else. And this lady would come out and she would tell me to get off the playground. And so I'd get off the playground and go home. And then when nobody was there, I would go over and I felt like, well, I had pretty well set up. And my sister came over and said, "Mom wants you to come over for dinner." And I said, "I'm not going." She says, "I'm going to tell Mom, and you know she's going to be upset." I said, "No, she loves me and she's not going to do anything to me." So this lady that told me to get off the yard came out of the building and she came over and she grabbed me by the hand. I was 3 years old, okay? And I got spanked by a principal when I was 3 years old. So you can understand what happened to me the rest of the 12 years. And she says, "Your mother wants you, and I don't want you." Get on out. So that's the way it was. Living on 6th Street, for me, was a real exercise in ingenuity. You had to be pretty sharp if you were going to make any money. I had an old reel type lawnmower, and the only time that I would get a job is when somebody had a big old yard that grass was tough, and you'd have to take scissors and cut alongside the sidewalk and push that thing. And that was Mr. and Mrs. Timmerman. The only job I got was Mr. Timmerman's place. And Mrs. Timmerman would keep her eye on me. And I did the best I could, and I'm not sure she thought it was fine, but anyway, that's what. People of notoriety who lived on South 6th Street, the Kadashes. The Kadashes lived down on Exchange, they're right on 6th and Exchange, right on the corner. And Mr. Kadash, I think it was Frank or Fred, had a drugstore, wholesale drugs, retail drugs, and then he went into work with Wilkinson, and he had about 7 or 8 kids, and Ed Kadash, if any of you are old enough to remember Ed Kadash, I bought my first pair of football shoes from Ed Kadash. They're on 10th and Main, or between 10th and 11th. I think he had sold glass and sold odds and ends, but anyway, he also sold football shoes. Then on up the street was Mr. Timmerman. Mr. Timmerman lived a big, huge house, and a wonderful house, full of antiques, and she was a very prim lady, and Mr. Timmerman's mother was a noted American actress in the early 1800s. Billy Timmerman's wife was an excellent musician in the middle 1800s. So they were pretty classy people, and I enjoyed talking to them and liked them very much. But I was always suspect because I was who I am. Anyway, but every Friday the Timmermans would come out, and they would dressed in hunting clothes. The English style, if you remember, the kind of boot pant, and they'd have boots, and then they had a coat, and then they had what's it, John Brown jacket? Is that what the old soldiers used to wear, the John Brown jacket? And they would get in their car, big nice car, and they would go out to their cabin on the river, on well, you know where Dr. Dascalo's house is, right on the corner? Now that's where their cabin was. Now I don't know whether, I think Doc probably fixed it up if it's the same old cabin anyway. But that's where it was, and they come back, and the doctor would tell me, you know, what a nice trip they had. And I would say, well, that's good, you know, thinking, you're going to take me, aren't you, one of these times, you're going to take me out there. They never did. All right, on up the corner was the Lutz house, Lutz Install Printing. If some of you are familiar with it, it used to be across from the old YMCA. And Mr. Lutz bought that house, and then when he gave it up, it kind of stood idle, and then I don't know what organization took it over, but there was a social agency that took it over and called it the Friendly House, moved the old Friendly House from down on Tymia Street, on 4th and Tymia, up to the Friendly House. And the Friendly House is a great place, but the Friendly House was where you found out what a pecking order means. Anybody that's familiar with a pecking order? Well, on 6th Street, you found out what a pecking order was pretty quick. You know, you're little, you get the last peck. And if you're big, you get the first. And it goes down the hill, and I have to say, I was there long enough to get the first pick. So that tickled me. But anyway, Ralph Thornton got his early start there. I was one of his, I guess you'd call them, students. He'd say, I'm going to teach you to box. He didn't teach me to box. But he sure got a lot of practice. And I wasn't the only one. There was a lot of guys, you know, that way. But anyway, that was a wonderful place for me to go and spend winter, late fall, and early spring. they had games to play, ping pong and whatnot. Then they put that addition on the back of it, and we had to play basketball down there, and it was really a nice place for the neighborhood, which went all the way down to Ridge Street. 6th Street, really, if you're thinking of 6th Street, you've got to think of 7th and 5th. And anybody that lived between 7th and 5th, and between Main Street and Ridge, was qualified. Now Judd tells me that he never lived in that particular area, but he was qualified. Qualified.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, he had a girlfriend.
6 and 10.
6 and Palin, there you go. But I recall, Judd, when you were quite a football player. I was pretty small and come out and watched, and he was a real chief. Anyway, then across from there was the Rand House. Now, when I was living there, the Moffats, Tommy Moffat and his wife, or his sister, and his brother lived there. Tommy and his brother were painters, and I think the wife or the sister was a housekeeper and whatnot. But they were people who were well-to-do. The Rands were people who were well-to-do. And Mr. Rand owned a farm. It's my understanding that he donated that farm. He told his people who was working for him, working with him, that he was going to donate the farm, and what could they name it? He wanted it to be a park or something. And that's how Rand Park came into being. It was donated by Mr. Rand, and I don't know whether it's been added to or anything, but right now Rand Park, as it is today, was originally started by Mr. Rand. And then finally, there was a Mr. Moody just across the street from the Rand house. He was a fur trader, I believe. He built that house. And that little house is now still in good shape. The Rand house is still in good shape. But when Mrs. Harrington, or Mrs. Timmerman died, in her will, she said, tear my house down. Now, it was not her house to begin with. It was built by her father-in-law, but she didn't want anybody else to live there. And so after she died, and the house was full of antiques, after she died, they tore the house down. And that's kind of sad because she died after I went to the service. She was a very petite lady. She was a very nice lady to talk to. And I wondered, that just exactly when all this happened. Now, get back to the rest of 6th Street. I got this book, and it says early Keokuk homes, and it says nothing about Billy Nelson, says nothing about Billy Knowles, says nothing about Norman Smith, says nothing about Joe Hornis, says nothing about Dick Rush. I don't understand that, because I really thought we were pretty important to that particular time. But, it didn't turn out that way. But at any rate, those are the things that I had to deal with growing up. After 2 years, I was in kindergarten. So things pretty much slowed down. Summers were wonderful. Summers we'd go, and by the way, speaking of our house was right there, 219 South 6th Street, and then the alley went right down like this. And Schultz's were a Jewish family, and they had a junkyard and a grocery store and a clothing store there, right close. And that's a treasure. You can't understand, or you can't remember, or you can't think the kind of things you could find in a junkyard. I tell you, I spent a lot of time in that junkyard, and I didn't sort the junk. I mean, I did. And old Morris, and he was the oldest son, he used to get pretty mad at me, and he'd chase me out of there, and I'd go back. He'd chase me out, and I'd go back. But it was all right because Max and Morris didn't get along. Max married, I don't know what you call him, an infidel. She was a Protestant. And the Jewish family didn't care much for that. So Max and Morris would get into it, and they would fight, and then when they were fighting, why, they would leave me alone. But I found a lot of things that were really worthwhile. And then if I got too many of those things that were worthwhile to me, Dutch, who is my father, would say, get that stuff out of here. I haven't got room in the garage for that. So I'd bunch it up in my wagon and take it down to Morris and sell it to him again. I tell you what, those were Depression days, and you couldn't, you just couldn't throw that stuff away. Anyway, we had a little Chinese boy that was in the neighborhood. Mike Dunn's grandma raised him, pretty much, I guess. They had a laundry there on South Fifth, and Bing Toy went to the Catholic school. And by the way, I went to the Wells Carey School, and probably I spent a lot of time fighting with those kids from St. Vincent's. It just seemed like the thing to do. It's all right for you Catholics, I married a Catholic. But anyway, those were I remember the Gradell boys. They were chewy and whatnot, and we used to, but you had to watch out because if both of them were together, you had to whip them both. Anyway, the situation there was that we were down in the side yard, and there's a big, where the junkyard was, well, on this place up here on Exchange Street, there was a little house. It had a nice yard, but there was a wall about 6 or 8 feet, bricked up. And Mr. and Mrs. Nichols lived there, and Happy happened to be a patrolman. He was one of the first motorcycle cops I ever saw, but he had a motorcycle, and his wife had her kitchen, her laundry out, all these sheets on her clotheslines, and they were all pinned up out there. And we were playing tin can hockey up on the top level. When I'm not going to say Bing Toy did it because I don't want to upset anybody, but I know that I didn't do it. But anyway, we kicked that can, and it went out over those sheets, making these slow rolls, and every time it'd get down, you'd throw a shot of rusty water across those sheets. And so anyway, everybody on 6th Street, including the police, knew Billy Knowles. They didn't know anybody else, but they knew Billy Knowles. So Barney Kahn and Billy Brennan, they were both good Irish cops, and they lived down on between Ridge or down there in some place, and they'd walk up over the hill and down. The police station was halfway to Blondo Street on 6th Street in the alley. And every day they'd walk down, and every day I would go over and walk with them down to the railroad tracks, and I'd make conversation with the cops. They didn't want to make conversation with me necessarily, so I kind of forced it on them. And they came and they could come up to get us. And Barney stopped at the front door, and my mother said, "Billy, come here." So I came in. I was in the house too. I mean, Bing Toy ran right to Nelson's house, and I ran right to my house because we knew we were in trouble. But I don't know where the other guys went, but they disappeared. Barney, when I came out, Barney didn't say anything to me. He just put his hand on my, right there behind my collar, shirt collar, and out the door I went. And he didn't say where he was taking me, he didn't tell my mother anything, he just took me. And we went up to Nelson's house. And Mrs. Nelson came to the door, and he said, I want Bing Toy. She said, well, he's in that bedroom. So Billy Brennan went in there, and I was standing there watching. And Bing Toy was under the bed, and the bed was in the corner, and he had a hold of that leg of that bed where it was in the corner. And Billy Brennan had reached down there and he grabbed Bing Toy's feet and he pulled him, and the bed had come out. And then he shoved that bed back up there, and Bing would go right back with it. He did that 2 or 3 times, and Barney says, come on, Bill, we're going to have to do something else. And he turned to me and he said, we're going to go back over and talk to your mother, and I'm telling you, I'm going to cut you from your mother's apron strings. She's not going to be covering for you anymore. Boy, and I just thinking in my head, yeah, that's okay with me. And of course, he says, and Mrs. Nelson says, no, come on, Barney. You know, these kids didn't do that on purpose, you know that. He says, I don't give a damn whether they did it on purpose or not, they did it. And that was it. So my mother and Mrs. Nelson washed those sheets. Now, I don't know whether they got all the rust out of them or not, but they did wash the sheets for Miss Toy. So now that was a little incident that happened early on in my experiences on South 6th. Do you know of any other ideas? You know, I on South 6th Street, when I was growing up, I had a dozen don'ts told to me, and I ignored all of them. Didn't seem right, but I did. There was a big police dog. The Youngs had a big police dog up in the alley, and Bob Frazee and I was up there, and we were probably 7 or 8, something like that. And I didn't like the food that she was feeding us. We had an old rug out across the clothesline, and we were Indians. And I didn't like what she was feeding me, so I took what it was, and Weller and I stuck my hand through the fence to Buddy, that was the dog's name, to, you know, and he took the food, and he bit me all the way through my hand. And so anyway, I went home, needless to say, and told my mother. And my dad came and got me, and he took me up to old Bill Rankin. If you knew old Bill Rankin, he was a fine doctor, but he had a terrible bedside manner. He got one of these little sticks, you know, and he put a lot of cotton on it, and he poured methylate on it, and he started here, and he shoved that thing all the way through. And then he did this, you know, and he said, shut up, that's not hurting you. And I knew it was. But anyway, he took it out, and that was the end of that. So then I was told not to come down Tymia Street from down to Bank, and then turn Bank and go down to Exchange Street because on my sled, because Exchange Street was quite busy and a commercial. I turned anyway, because that was a nice hill too, go all the way down. Well, I went down once too many times, and the Super Oil truck was making a turn down there, and so I hit the back duals, and it's kind of like a ball bat, and he rolled me back up the hill, but he's a nice guy, and he stopped, and he picked me up, and I had a bunch of lacerations in my head. My sled was a mess, and took me up the house, and he said, now, Dutch, he said, you take him to the doctor, and we'll take care of it. Don't worry about it. And he said, we'll give him a noose, don't worry about it. And I said, hey, he wrecked my sled. And Dad said, as soon as he goes, I'm gonna wreck you. Which he did. Consequently, you know, that was my second problem. I don't know when I made the decision that maybe the don'ts make some sense.
Yeah.
Not too much, but some. So I listened a while and I said, well, maybe not, maybe not. So I was 14, carrying the Quincy Herald wig, and Montgomery Ward's pulled a bunch of bicycles out, had them lined up out there on the sidewalk, alongside the KC Hall now. And they were special, $14, brand new, red and white and blue and white. And by that time, my Cons had moved, and Red, the banker was dead. It's all right. He was a banker anyway. They were on 5th and Main, and I knew him. And so I went up there and I said, hey, any chance I could borrow some money? 14 years old. And he said, no, I can't lend you any money. He said, do you have any money now? I said, no. And he said, well, you better talk to Ray McCleary, because he can probably, take care of you. And so I went over to Ray's office, and he took me over there. And Ray was the president, and Ray was a big guy, and pretty cool. And he said, how much money you got in your pocket? And I said, 25 cents. And he says, that's not enough. And I said, I know it's not. But he said, how much do you want to borrow? And I said, $14. And he said, how do you propose to pay it? And I said, I'll pay you so much a week. He says, how much do you make on your paper route? And I said, $2. He says, will you give me $1 a week until you get this paid off? That's 14 weeks. And I said, yes, I can do that. And he says, okay, we'll do that. So he reaches in his pocket, he gets his billfold out, and he gives me $14. I mean, this was a loan, and he said, you're not going to have to sign anything, We're shaking on this. And I said, okay. So we shook on it, and that's unusual during the Depression. And I took the $14, went down and bought that bicycle, and it was about 11 o'clock. I rode it home, and my dad drove the truck from Street over, got me up there for lunch. And he got out and he said, where'd you get that bike? I said, I bought it. Where'd you get the money? I said, I borrowed it from Mr. McCleary. He says, get in the truck. So I got in the truck. Are you people interested in this stuff?
Yes, yes.
Anyway, we went up to Mr. McCleary, and Dad took me in, and he said, does Ray in? And yeah, everybody knew my dad. I guess my dad knew everybody, I don't know. But anyway, and Ray said, what's the matter, Dutch? And he says, you've got a lot of nerve. And he said, what do you mean? He says, this kid's 14 years old. And he says, you committed him? I said, I didn't commit him. Ray said, I didn't commit him to anything. He came in and he said, I want to buy a bicycle. All I got's a quarter, but if I had $14, I could buy this bike. And he said, I can pay you back $1 a week till it's paid for. That's it. If I came up and wanted to buy a house and said, don't have any money, and give you $1 a week, would you? Ray said, come on now, Dutch, this kid was sincere. He said, he's going to be sincere. So anyway, Dad said, well, you're going to take that bike back and get the money. And Ray says, no, you're not. He said, that money is my money. It's not the bank's money. It's not your money. It's between you and he and I. And when he and I made an agreement, we shook hands on it. That was it. So consequently, I want him to have that bike, and he's going to pay me back. And if he doesn't pay me back, it's my loss. And he says, you're not losing anything. So anyway, we went home, and Dutch talked to me all the way back home. It was nice, but he talked to me. And, but I got to keep the bike, and I got Ray paid off. And I never went back and borrowed any more money from him, you know. Well, actually, I didn't have the time. I started working at J.C. Penney's, and then I started working at Kenny's Shoe Store. Then I started working at Johnson Smith's. Then I started working everywhere because needed the money. And we were making progress, I guess, or I was. Except that my dad said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm saving my money." "What are you going to do?" He said, "I'm going to buy a car." He said, "You're not going to buy a car." I was 16. Or I wasn't 16. You couldn't get a driver's license until you were 16, I think, back then. And I think I was 15 or something. But anyway, I saved his money, and up the alley where Roy Mosley used to live, I don't know who was living there now. But anyway, he was a mail carrier, and he had an old 26 Studebaker, and it was in great shape, and it was black and shiny, and it was all as shiny as it could be. And I said, "You're going to sell that car?" And he said, "Yes." I said, "What do you want for it?" He said, "How much money you got?" And I said, $40. He said, "Sold." So I gave him my $40, drove the thing home. Dutch said, "No, you're not. This is not going to happen again." And I said, "It's paid for, Dad. It's paid for." He said, "We're going to put it in the garage until you're 16. You're not even old enough to drive." And I said, "I know, but you're not old enough to drive, so put it in there." So I put it in the garage and left it there. On the eve of my 16th birthday, Bob Frazee and I pushed that car out of the garage, and we left it out of gear, pushed it down over the hill, and then put it in gear going down into where the old junkyard used to be, and started it, and we drove all over town, and we had a good time, and we were heading home. And who should I run into but Mr. Ketchum, who was a patrolman, and Ed Donahue. And he said, they stopped me, and said, "You didn't stop there on 14th and Main." And I said, "Well, I slowed down." And he said, "But that don't count." He says, "You're going to get a ticket." And Ed was a little nicer. See, some of these Catholic boys are okay. Ed said, "You know, we don't want to give him a ticket for that. You know, he'll get his license tomorrow." Well, he will, but he's not going to get it tonight. So he took me down to the police station, and Mickey Franks, police chief, he was in there, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "Well, I think you got a problem." And Bill said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Bill, what's the matter?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Ketchum says I didn't stop at that stop sign." And he looked at Ed, and Ed says he did. He said it was kind of a jackrabbit stop. He said he shoved it into second, and he kept right on going, I think. And he said, "Well," he said, "listen." He says, "You take that car home, and you leave it there until you got a license, okay? And this ticket you're going to be due in jail. You're going to be due in court on Monday." So I did that. Took it home and put it in the garage. And when I went to court, my mother and Dad was up there. And my dad was happy about it, you know that. And Judge Kincannon said, and we had a name for Judge Kincannon, which wasn't a nice name. and so Judge said, "How do you plead?" And I says, "Well, Judge, I've got a license." And he says, "You've what?" He says, "I've got a license. Let me see it." So I pulled out my license. I got it that morning when the courthouse opened. I got it because I was 16. He looked at that. "Well," he says, "Officer Donahue, what do you think about this?" He handed it to Ed. Ed shook his head like this, you know. And he said, "Judge, look at the date." He looked on that. Judge grabbed that gavel and said, "Guilty or not?" He said, $8. And I said, "I don't have $8. He says, "That $1 a day," he said, "you're going to lay it out." And I heard my mother say, Dutch, he's not gonna lay anything out. Dutch got up and came out and gave the bailiff $8 and freed me again. And then, that was my next big problem. Then I was in the service. And we were, I think we ought to talk about what we were doing in the side yard, December the 7th, 1941. Anybody remember that? Some of you guys, you probably were already have gotten your
No,
draft notice, hadn't you?
no, I was a 4F.
Oh, well, I should have been. No, I'm kidding you. Anyway, we were playing touch football, and there were 8 of us out in the side yard playing touch football. And my dad was listening to the radio, and he came to the door and said, you boys better come in here and listen to this because it's going to affect all of you. So we came in here, and that's when President Roosevelt was making his speech to Congress and saying that they were going to declare war on Japan and that sort of thing. And when the thing was over, we went back out, and I thought to myself, you know, that did affect all of us. Because I was a junior, and I had a junior year in this, and right after I graduated, we went to the Navy, and I was a PT boat sailor, and it was and none of us on South 6th Street got killed in the service. Tommy Wooster, I remember, was over on 14th or 15th on the south side. A.J. Wilson on the south side. We had several boys in our group that lost their lives, but I did. Anyway, that was the South 6th Street was a place that I felt like I was free to move around. I sold. How about Cloverine salve? Any of you people still remember Cloverine salve? Nobody does. Oh my golly! I still. When my mom was still getting calls from people wanting to know if we had any Cloverine salve left. You know, they were out of it. And but I sold that, and I sold Liberty, and I sold Radio Guide, and I carried the Quincy Herald Wagon, and the Des Moines Register, and anything to make a dime. Why, I was out doing that. And that's the sum and substance of what Billy Knowles did. And by the way, I'm David, you understand that? And Billy was my brother. I just want you to remember that. Billy was my brother. And anybody who doesn't believe that, why, I'm with you. Okay. Is there any questions? Anybody want to ask me anything or say anything, or you want me to go on? Yes.
I just want to know, wasn't there any girls involved when you were growing up?
Yes. I tell you what, the girls were pretty much sheltered. It was in summertime. You remember how hot it was? Maybe when you didn't have air conditioning back then. We all slept. My sisters and the Marks girls, and they would sleep on the front porch, and the boys and everybody was sleeping back. And so anyway, we slept in back. And I don't suppose any of you know anything about bootlegging, do you? Well, there was a couple of fellows whose grandpa made beer, and he said, "Tonight I'm going to go get some beer and bring it up." So they got the beer and they brought it up, and it was nothing we liked. But anyway, it was, you'd shake it up, boy, and it would just go everywhere. All over the back of my dad's house, all over our blankets and everything. And terrible. So everybody put their blankets over the clotheslines, and they went out home so they could get some sleep. And my dad got up and was getting ready to go to work, and he couldn't. He was getting a little woozy from, I think, the beer smell coming out the kitchen window. And I had to wash off the back of the house. That was my penalty. It was better than a whipping though, because the only whipping I got was from Mrs. Helwig. I know that Harry McPhail was my principal at Wells Carey, and he said, "Hey, why don't you ask your dad if I can spank you?" He said, "You were fighting," and I said, "I wasn't fighting. I was a block away from school, and happened to be I was fighting with the Vaughn brothers, Jack and Beezer, and so anyway, he said, well, that's going to get it." He said, "I'm going to call your dad." And he said, because being a block away from school doesn't make any difference. And he called my dad, and my dad said, "No." He says, "You may not spank my son." He said, "You may have pity. I don't." He says, "Just call me and tell me what he's done and what he needs." And so the next day, I went back to McPhail and knocked on the door of the principal's office, and he answered the door and came in. "What do you want?" And I said, "I want you to know, the next time you need to whip me, whip me." Call my name. You gotta be prepared. I don't know what, I don't want to talk forever, but,
There's a question in the back. Who are the harnesses? Which harness family was that?
that was Ray Harness,
Uh-huh.
Helen Harness, Margaret Harness married Dick Rush, Francis Harness married George Hosford, Hamilton,
Okay.
Larry
okay.
Hosford, you probably knew
Sure.
Larry,
Uh-huh.
that was his son.
Okay.
And,
Oh, harness.
but anyway, then some sad things happened to me too. I mean, everything wasn't fun. I was going up to St. Vincent's for a softball game. We were playing ball, and Billy was coming down the sidewalk, and he was by himself. Mrs. Timmerman was up there, and she was bringing flowers, and right in front of Timmerman's, why, Billy Brennan just kind of went like this, and just fell over backwards, and just almost turned black almost immediately. And Mrs. Timmerman ran down and says, "All right, Bill, you stay here. You stay here." And I didn't want to stay there because I looked at me like he was gone. And she said, "You stay here, I'm going to call the police." So I had to stay there, and she never came back out again. She called the police. And then the police and an ambulance came up and got him, and he had a heart attack or a stroke or something, and he died right there on the sidewalk going to work. And so anyway, and I had to, and when my grandmother died, my uncles and my dad stayed up with her all night. How you used to do that, you remember? Does anybody remember how they used to sit up with the, and I insisted that I do that. And I woke up a little bit there in the middle of the night, all my uncles and my dad was asleep, you know, like this, but, so I went back to sleep again. But that was my only, until I got into service, and then I got into service, it was a little different. Okay, anything else? I mean, you know, has this been interesting? Yes.
I took piano lessons on the, and I think I lived on the corner of 12th and Exchange, but I took piano lessons from Mary Ellen Sansone.
Yes.
And didn't she live on the corner of, was it 6th and Bank or
5th and
5th
Bank,
what?
5th and Bank.
Was she there when you were,
Yes, she was there, and Al
And Lou.
Sansoni was her brother,
okay,
and Al was a singer, and he sang on WCAZ. Not very good, but he sang. He's dead now, so I can say that.
no,
And-
I just remember walking
well,
down there and all those steps.
Yeah, my sister took Helen took some piano lessons
Yeah.
from her too.
I heard you mention Dick Rush,
Yes,
and he used to talk about South Sixth Street. He was my machine shop foreman.
Oh, he was?
Several years,
yeah.
and how rough it was. He talked about playing King of the Mountain here.
Well, we played King of the Mountain, we played Run Sheep Run, we played Duck on Davy, and we played Hot Butter and Blue Beans. Now, those all were, you chose up sides, and you had a captain. And the only way that you could win was capture the members of the other team. And so somebody had to go hide a belt. And they hid the belt, or they hid two belts, depending on what it was. And then they would hide the belt, and they would be off here standing around. And the team that was supposed to check them out to find out where the belt, we'd find the belt, and whoever found the belts would not say anything. They'd know it was there, and they would wait until somebody, me especially, I was a slow runner, and others, and when they would get 2 or 3 of us there, they'd yell, "Hot butter and blue beans," and they'd grab that belt, and then they'd start whipping us with that belt, and we ran to the goal. Now, you know, that wasn't fun. But it was only if you were the whipper instead of the whippy. Then, of course, we also played, when the girls were playing, we played, you know, what is it? Rovers, King Rover?
Oh,
Red
yeah.
Rover.
That someone would come over and then, you
Rover,
know,
Red Rover.
and if the girl was pretty, we'd let her through. And she wasn't, but, can't have that. Okay, needless to say, is there many more questions or whatnot? You want another 10 minutes? Are you good? It's been, anyway, we, lost my train of thought here.
Were the Timmermans, tell me about the Timmermans a little bit more, were they very well-to-do?
Oh, well, yes. He was well-to-do. He was a member of the bar, and I have in here
He was a lawyer?
legal, yeah. Instead, I didn't know. I thought, well, you guys said that Billy Timmerman was a member of the bar. Why? You'd think he was down at the local. Well, by the way,
The only bar he ever
that was one thing about it. I could get a quarter. There was a tavern when Schultz's sold out and moved away. A tavern went into that place right down there. Joe Glasgow and 11 Glasgow boys lived across the alley, and they had a whole baseball team. But that was a tavern there, and for 75 cents, you know, you get them a bucket of beer. And so I had some customers. And so I was 11 or 12. I could go down there and for 75 cents, get a bucket of beer and take it out, and they didn't never card me. So those were the good ones. And you used to every once in a while you'd buy a ticket from Harrington's on the. You remember the theater used to have that screeno, and you could buy tickets from the guys that were selling them, and the tickets were a quarter, and sometimes you win a lot of money, but I never did. But that was one of those don'ts that I disregarded too. Yeah. Any questions? Anything? Well, I certainly hope this was by the way, now, all of you here, Sue explained to me when she called me that she was on a very limited budget. Now, I don't know what percentage I get out of the total take tonight, but, please give well.
Thank you, David.
and visit with me, asked, yes,
You mentioned Walt Cashin and Barney Kahn. Did you ever have any contact with Louis Atkins?
you betcha. Louis was tough.